In the previous video, we talked about lateral inhibition. Lateral inhibition can take place wherever there are synapses, but it usually takes place inside the thalamus. Remember I told you in our brain and spinal cord unit that the thalamus was like a switchboard. About 90% of the sensory information that's sent to the thalamus never actually ascends to the primary somatosensory cortex in the parietal lobe. And that's because of lateral and presynaptic inhibition. On this slide, we're taking a look at two different pathways that sensory information can take. One of them is called the dorsal or posterior column, and the other is called the anterolateral pathway. Now, both of these pathways are describing sensory information coming into the central nervous system and traveling up the spinal cord and into the brain. That's why they're called ascending pathways. And each ascending pathway contains three different neurons. There's a first order neuron, which is the one that contains the sensory receptors and collects information from the periphery. The second order neuron and the third order neuron are both located inside of the central nervous system instead. Now, these two pathways are different in terms of their anatomical characteristics, but they're also different in terms of the type of sensory information that they carry. So we're going to be drawing these two pathways when we're together in class so that we can take a look at those anatomical and functional differences between them. The last point that I want to make in this video is that the process of sensation has a lot of plasticity, which means that it's very dynamic. And these receptor potentials and action potentials in synapses can change. One example of this is sensory adaptation, which is when you become desensitized to a repeated stimulus. This is something that we alluded to back in our skeletal muscle unit at the neuromuscular junction. So, for example, when you sat down to listen to this lecture, you most likely felt a pretty strong pressure stimulus on your butt that was created by your chair activating mechanoreceptors. But until I pointed this out to you just now, chances are that you really haven't been feeling this pressure stimulus. And that's because pressure receptors are classified as phasic or rapidly adapting receptors. Even though there's a strong pressure stimulus the entire time that you're sitting on your chair, your receptor potential and your action potential frequency decrease. If you have a headache or you're in pain, then chances are you're finding it really difficult to focus on the words that are coming out of my mouth right now. And that's because pain is an example of a tonic or slowly adapting receptor. In a way, you don't want your body to desensitize to pain because it's telling you that something is wrong. So if you have an intense pain stimulus, you'll continue to get a lot of receptor potential from the nociceptors, and you'll continue to have high frequency action potentials being delivered into the primary somatosensory cortex through the anterolateral pathway. And again, we'll talk about that path when we're together in class.